Hello and welcome to module number 4. The focus of module number 4 is getting deeper into evaluation measures and components. And before we dig into the module, I want to frame where we've been and how this week's module connects to that. So we started with that big overview, looking at the rationale and purpose for supervision, and historically, what supervision has consisted of, and some of those big pieces like Raise to the Top that really had a significant impact on the components and measures of evaluation that we're going to talk about today. Then we got into policy and guidance, and everybody in Module 2 analyzed their own evaluation systems. And so our work today is really going to connect to that. Last week, we started getting into really being able to define what are effective teacher behaviors and how we can use a framework to define the effective teacher behaviors that we want to see across classrooms. Today, or this week, actually, we are going to go back to those components and measures. And I don't want this to feel like you've already done it, because you did. You went and you identified what those components are, which ones are there, which ones aren't. Based on that state guidance that's provided. But in order to leverage supervision and meet the purpose of supervision, the objective this week is really to get into those different components and measures. So observations, goal setting, student achievement, perception, and get a shared understanding for what's the purpose of those things, and to really start thinking about how we can leverage them. And I'll get into that more. So we have three main objectives this week. So the first is to really know and understand the measures and components of an evaluation process in order to analyze the components in your own evaluation system. And ultimately, we want to know and analyze those pieces because ultimately, as future leaders and current teacher leaders, my objective is for you to be able to leverage and improve those components to support growth and continuous improvement of teacher practice. I am finished grading and reviewing your analysis of your district evaluation process. And I'm going to use that to reconnect us to the purpose of evaluation and supervision. And so I read through the different handbooks or rationales, and three of the five Marshall rationales were very clearly illustrated in all of those rationale statements. So first and foremost, all of your district evaluation systems, they were connected to a district policy. And in most cases, that was aligned with your state requirements for teacher evaluation. In addition, a lot of those purpose statements included words like the purpose is to provide clear expectations for teaching practices, clarity of roles. And then this is house cleaning, but it's also a function of appraisal, which is just that function of retention, promotion, and dismissal. So that HR function of supervision and evaluation. The second purpose that was really at the center of all of your district rationales was this idea of improvement. And so different districts used words like growth, development, expanding on skills. There were a couple districts that actually said that evaluation it should be used to prioritize the goals of the district and the school. And not all, but some did talk about it should be focused on learning of students and approving achievement. Um, Everybody addressed house cleaning in some way. It wasn't necessarily always written in that rationale or purpose statement, and I think that's okay, because really, when you think about it, 98% of the teachers that go through evaluation, it is for appraisal and improvement. It's not for dismissal, but that is a real part of evaluation. Then finally, I did want to address quality assurance and affirmation. These were two areas that in some students' reflections for week 2, they talked about, our rationale for evaluation doesn't really address this explicitly, either of these two. But you reflected that that's important. So I do want to address these two things, and give you examples of why this is an important purpose for both of these things are an important purpose for evaluation. So I'm going to start with affirmation. And I spoke to this in the last module summaries, which is evaluation and supervision. Being in a teacher's classroom and recognizing their practice and what they're doing is really important for their identity as of a teacher. So affirming, like, yes, you are doing this, you are on track, that is really important to keep teachers engaged and motivated, and to address their identity as a teacher. Equally important too, though, like, and I don't think that we always connect this to affirmation, but it's this idea that you're affirming you're not alone. Um, our teaching practice is so isolated. Oftentimes, through evaluation, I would uncover that some teachers thought they were alone in dealing with certain situations in their classrooms. And because of my role through being in every single classroom, when I was in the evaluation process with staff, I was able to acknowledge to them, hey, like, nobody in our school has a really well developed assessment practice right now, so this is something that we are going to be working on. And so you can use evaluation to affirm strengths and things that people are doing. I see you. You also can use evaluation to affirm you're not alone. And I work with a principal right now who he does a really good job of using evaluation to do that individual affirmation. He also uses it to get an idea of what's happening across classrooms and how can I then leverage that insight when I'm working with the entire staff, and talking to them about, I'm seeing some of these practices in place, I'm not seeing this, so this is something that we're going to work on together. So that's affirmation. I also wanted to address quality assurance, because when you become a school leader or a district leader, you will have parents who call you with concerns about things that their student is reporting to them or things that they may or may not be observing. And in my experience, I found that this occurred more and more often. And more often, parents really took their students' perceptions at face value. And this was especially relevant and important, I believe, when I was working with bias of parents, or from parents' perspectives, when they were concerned about certain teachers' and classroom practices. So here's where quality assurance really came into play. Because I was in every single classroom multiple times, when a parent called me with concerns, I knew what was going on in the classroom. I knew the context of what the teacher's practice was or wasn't. And so, because I had a good understanding of everything that was happening in the classrooms, there were instances where I could say, well, I understand that your student feels this way. Let me provide you the context. Or I do not have concerns about this teacher's expectation. So I could assure to that parent with confidence, like, I know what's going on. At the same time, there were instances where I would have student or parent concerns about teacher practice, and I would be able to acknowledge that. Like, yes, I do know that that is happening in the classroom, and we are addressing that and we are working on it. And that's okay too. Um, I could have those. I could assure that to when I was having conversations with parents, because I was in classrooms and I was working with teachers through that evaluation process. The other thing I want to review, because this is very connected to what we are going to be doing today, and I want to acknowledge that you have started this work today. So in module 2, I asked you to do a pretty thorough analysis of your district's existing evaluation system. And I included Waverly District 145 in that. So we have 11 different districts that are represented. We have multiple part or class members that are in the Lincoln Public Schools. But all of the other districts are represented by one person. And so 3 of our class participants use the Marzano framework. 4 of the districts use the Danielson framework, and then Shickley, the ESU, and Elkhorn use a district developed instructional framework. And then I also just looked to analyze how many districts had these different components as part of their process, because this week we're going to all get deeper into analyzing the individual components. So 9 out of 11 had informal observations. Most of those were unscheduled. There were a couple of districts that had formal observations, informal observations, and in addition would have walkthroughs. And formal observations, everybody has a component of formal observations. And this would be true because it's a state requirement. For both of the states that are represented. The big difference, and something that I want you to think about when you're doing your component analysis, is that 7 of the 11 districts, they have a formal observation every year, regardless of whether or not you're probationary or permanent. 4 of the districts have a formal observation every year for probationary teachers, but for permanent, it's every other year or every 3 years. So once a teacher reaches permanent status, they are not having a formal observation, only informals. 5 of the 11 districts required some sort of professional learning plan as part of the evaluation process. But this was a consistent theme or topic that came up in your reflections, which was I think professional learning is separate. There wasn't, in some cases, there was not clarity in where does the professional learning plan fall? Is it in continuous improvement? Is it in the evaluation process? 9 out of 11 had a goal setting component. But artifacts were not consistent across districts. So many districts did require professionals to set a goal as part of their professional or part of their evaluation process. Shickley is the only district that is using student learning objectives. And yet the connection and a lot of reflections, people started thinking about how does student achievement connect to evaluation, and this is going to be a part of your analysis. And then finally, nobody currently is using student perception surveys. Lincoln Public Schools does do school perception surveys, and there were different types of practice with that. But nobody in our class is using student perception data. And that would include District 145, where I'm at as well. So here are some common themes, issues, and recommendations that you made in this module tool. So the first thing that came up was this relationship between professional goals, evaluation, and professional learning. That wasn't. There was instances where it wasn't aligned, it wasn't clear, and a lot of people made a recommendation. Not, I say a lot. Some people made the recommendation to tighten that up, and this is going to be something that we're going to talk about in further modules. The second theme that kept coming up was student achievement and its role in evaluation. So this idea of value added, and that's going to be this week. Student perception data and its role in evaluation. So nobody's using it. Some of you reflected on that and thought about it, made the connection to the recommendations from the Met. And then the other issue is just more frequent observations. And I see this play out in, okay, I'm a district, and what is that sweet spot of number of observations, and then what do we use to determine if we're going to drop off that formal observation once a teacher becomes permanent. So I want to focus your lens for this module. We now know what components are in place and which components are not place. Now we're really going to get into, okay, how are these components or measures? How are they to be implemented? And specifically, let's start to really look at how do these measures and components, how do they facilitate three really important parts of teacher evaluation, which is reflection, feedback, and assessment. If the purpose of, which I believe it is, the purpose of teacher evaluation is to support the growth of practice and continuous improvement, in order to change practice, you have to be able to reflect on your existing practice. You need feedback to, like, what is your practice, like what is going on, and are you making improvements? And we need assessment data. This is very comparable to the classroom, and I like to use this analogy. When you think about students in the classroom, in order to learn and to build skills, students need feedback, and they need to reflect on their own learning, and they need to know and be able to self-assess and get feedback from assessment from their teachers, like, where am I at in my knowledge and skills, and where do I need to go? So we want to think about, how do these different components, how do they facilitate the opportunity for teacher and evaluator to reflect, provide and receive feedback, and to assess summatively at some points where are we at in relationship to where we want to be or need to be. And then the second piece is then, okay, once we know how these different components do that, how can we leverage them? How can we implement them in ways to really support that growth and continuous improvement? So that's our focus for Module 4. And let's go back to that the teacher and what happens in the classroom is the most influential factor in student achievement. And we also know that evaluation and supervision, it can facilitate the conditions that can lead to improved teacher performance. It also can contribute to continuous school improvement. This is when it's done effectively and accurately. So this is an outcome of the course, is to prepare you with the knowledge and the skills to be able to engage in supervision and evaluation effectively and accurately. Teachers are, in order to become effective, right? So effective teachers have an effective, or have an impact on achievement. Just like students in the classroom, there's going to be some teachers who are able to improve their practice with very little instruction. They're self-reflective, they're self-driven, and they're able to improve their practice. This is a few or some. And it probably, from what I can tell from your reflections and analysis, this is you. You are the teachers that are self-motivated, you're self-driven, and you are facilitating your own growth and continuous improvement. So that's there's a few or some. The majority of teachers, they need those structures in order to improve. And then there's always going to be a couple that like really need a lot of additional support and structures to improve and acquire that skills and knowledge. And the disheartening thing is that a lot of professional learning and a lot of things that we do with teachers, unfortunately, doesn't result in a change in practice. And so part of my job is to help build your knowledge and skills so you can leverage evaluation to to improve the teaching of the majority of teachers that you work with. And oftentimes, this is the role of the principal. And for a lot of you, this would be your next role. But it's also applicable if you're a teacher leader or if you are a district office leader, if you provide support services, that and those instructional skills and instructionally focused interactions like evaluation are really important in improving collective teacher practice. Um, so, so the piece that really connects with that Wallace report, this module is the fact that evaluations findings do connect that principles implementation of the evaluation process. It does lead, when done well and appropriately, can lead to teachers improved practice, which ultimately then impacts student learning and achievement. um, the what we're going to look at today, going back to our core and foundational articles, we're going to focus primarily on the research findings from the Met. And there's three recommendations in particular from the Met that are relevant to this week's module. So the first is that there's a recommendation that strongly consider using student surveys as one component of that evaluation. And so this is communicating that students spend more time with the teacher than even the evaluator who's in the school. And so they do provide accurate and effective information. Like basically, it's saying students do know what effective teaching is, and they are able to give that feedback through a perception survey. Another recommendation was that principal feedback to teachers, it does improve classroom practice, which they did find led to improvements in achievement. And understanding the purpose of the components and how to implement it appropriately is like a prerequisite to being able to give effective feedback. Another recommendation that came from the Met was that teacher evaluation should be based on multiple measures of performance, not just on classroom observations. And one of that is data on student academic progress. And this is a super controversial topic, but we need to think about it. And because student achievement is our ultimate goal, we need to be able to take a position on this and to identify ways that we can and are using student achievement as a way to evaluate like the effectiveness of our instruction. And then the final recommendation actually came from the Mirage, not the Met, but that's to give teachers a clear, deep understanding of their own performance and progress. And why I put this on here for you to think about this week is, again, in order to give teachers that feedback, we have to have the components in place. And so we need to have multiple opportunities and multiple pieces of data that we can collect objectively and present them in a way that it's useful to teachers. So this is the research that is going to guide what we're doing today. So the first thing that you will be doing this week is you are going to be analyzing the different components of evaluation. And all of you have created a graphic that illustrates the different components that are a part of your evaluation process. And so you're going to start here. And everybody had in some capacity goals, and that goal setting process. So you're gonna be looking at that. You are going to be thinking about informal observations, which are those short, frequent observations to get a better idea of what's happening day to day in the classroom. Informals are also kind of formative in a way. They provide the opportunity for you to give feedback to teachers like throughout the cycle. So it's that like formative, hey, I know this is your goal. This is what I saw in the classroom, some reflective questions to help move that practice forward to the goal practice that the teacher identified. A formal observation, I want you to analyze all of the components of a formal observation, including the pre-conference, the actual observation, and a post-conference. Pre-conferences oftentimes get skipped and become form based. And I am a huge advocate and supporter of having a 10 to 15 minute pre face to face conference with teachers before the formal observation. I think it's very important to have that back and forth conversation to really assess the teacher's understanding of students, to get a deeper understanding of how the teacher is, what they're thinking about in planning the lesson, what they're anticipating to see happen in the lesson. And then it helps you to know, okay, what should I focus this observation on based on that teacher's goal and what the teacher wants feedback for. So that's just my own personal thing. Professional learning is a component. I do not spend a great deal of time on the professional learning component. This is one of the components that not a lot of people have in place, and we are going to address this later on. And then finally, the artifacts and evidence that are collected during an evaluation. I have provided 2 documents to support you in completing this analysis. So first, you're going to have, there's an analysis framework in the assignment, and you're going to first identify what's the purpose of the component, and then you're going to look at practice. So you're going to describe what are the recommendations for how this would be implemented? And you're also going to think about how is it being implemented in my building? What is my experience? What am I seeing? And then finally, I want you to think, oh, and going back to that, an important part of this is too, like thinking about the connections between the different components. So how can these components work in conjunction with each other to support continuous growth? And then finally, thinking about that part of impact. So why should I invest in this component? Why should teachers invest in this component? How is it going to impact the feedback that we are giving and receiving? How is it going to impact reflection of the teacher and assessment, and possibly other impacts on practice? And then just to think about in your head is for you to start thinking about, does this current state of implementation support the purpose of the component? I put 2 files in the module for you to support you and inform you on this. So the first is, this is Danielson's summaries of the purpose and the recommended implementation of these practices. If you use Marzano, you have these documents as well. And I encourage you to use the documents that you have as well that define purpose and like best practice for implementation, because that's real. And so that's the second resource that I've given you. So When I'm designing this class, and this is my first time teaching it, I've thought about a couple things. One, I always want to present you with a manageable and reasonable amount of research to ground our work in. Then I want to really get at purpose and beliefs. And then finally, I want to give you some practical examples. And so I have spent the last 2 years implementing a new evaluation system. And then I work with principals on a monthly basis to support their implementation of evaluation. And so in this slide deck, I have a combination of just the purpose, but I'm sharing some of the resources that I use with teachers and staff and with principals. Take it or leave it. Um, you might consider just developing your own folders of resources that you can use in your roles as teacher leaders, but also when you become principals. Um, you support the implementation of this, and so I put some like just real practical things, and I will continue to do that. And again, take it or leave it. But I always think it's nice to have a template or a framework to do that. So those are the resources that I've given you. This is the biggest chunk of work in this module. So if you're thinking about prioritizing and spending your energy, this would be the place where I would prioritize. The second thing, because this issue arose, and Shickley's the one school that's doing the student learning objectives, and we did not incorporate it into the District 145 process because I thought, okay, we're doing that in continuous improvement, so we don't need to put it in the evaluation process. And this is even teaching this class is even getting me thinking, and we might evolve our practice. But I have two things in here for you because you are going to have to think about student achievement. Student achievement is our ultimate goal. And the improvement of practice or the growth of practice is for the purpose of impacting student achievement. And so I find it like difficult to think that we would eliminate or remove that completely from the evaluation process. I can tell you, value added was a really big recommendation and requirement of Race to the Top. This was 2008 through 2012. The reviews have been mixed. And I dropped an article about Houston. Like there are a lot of negative impacts of using value added. I also included an article that really is supportive of value added. I think it's an interesting thing to read about and think about. It is not going to happen in the state of Nebraska. Like we are not going to have a value added evaluation process. So I think it's a moot point. Like I'm not going to ask you if you agree or disagree. What I do want you to think about though is how do we connect student achievement and evaluation? And so the guidance from the student learning objectives, I think is good in guidance. Essentially, it's a SMART goal. And I think a lot of us are setting SMART goals. So it's thinking about how do I connect that process of my student learning objectives and my professional goal. And so start thinking about that. And then the final piece is student perception data. And this is more, you don't have an assignment connected to this, but I did want you to think about this because a lot of people, not a lot, some of you identified like thinking about what if we added student perception data, or our evaluation system says teachers can use it, but they don't have to. So I am uploading the guidance for student perception again, because that's a really short read and overview. The second thing I have here, I actually shared with all of our district staff at the beginning of the school year. My kickoff was about setting the stage for learning. And I really took all of us into the components from classroom environment. And so I shared this data chart that comes from the MET report. And what the MET report strongly encouraged evaluation systems to include student perception data, because it really provides teachers, again, with that objective view of their classroom. And the view of their classroom as students. Now, some people would maybe critics to using student perception data as one data source would say, well, students are, if they like the teacher, they're going to give them a certain sort of rating. And that's going to impact then how teachers interact in the classroom. What the Met uncovered, is that students do recognize effective teaching and are able to give that accurate feedback, when they experience effective teaching. And it also illustrates that students in the classrooms of effective teachers also achieve at a higher level. Okay, so before I summarize the assignment, I want to go back to why. Why are we still spending time on the components? And the reason being is twofold. So the first is time. I often hear, and we've been hearing it a lot, that evaluation takes so much time. And I hear it in a negative way. And so we have a limited amount of time. And we also have state policies and statutes that require us to evaluate teachers. And so the thing that I think is that we have to do this anyway, right? So we can continue to live in compliance of evaluation, or we can really think about, okay, I have to do this. I have to evaluate teachers. So, how do I use that time again to leverage um, feedback, reflection, to support the continuous growth of teachers? And so the second thing, we have to spend the time anyway. So why not use that time in a way, again, that is going to support continuous growth, and the achievement of our goals? The second thing that I want to address in terms of evaluation is this connection to our habits. So when you become a leader, whether it's school or district, evaluation is, I kind of equate it to like training for a big race or practicing for the performance, right? It's this thing that is supported by systems. And if we really do it well, right? If we really are disciplined and engaged and in this process, then it can result in improved teaching, which then ultimately results in improved student achievement. Um, but it requires, again, systems, and commitment to that process in order to reach that desired goal. I'm currently reading that book, Atomic Habits, and I think about the evaluation process a lot. And so when I'm interacting with people, there's a large continuum of emotions about the evaluation process. And same thing as, I'm a runner, and I have had these same feelings, and I hear it with people a lot, is it can be a pain, like, gosh, I don't want to go and train. But I know if I invest in my training, and I engage in things like accountability and support, and I use the data, right? And I set up those systems, that training ultimately supports the attainment of the goal, like being able to complete the marathon. And so I truly do think that evaluation, it requires, it is a compliance thing, but it requires commitment and systems to support it. Um, and so ultimately, I've said this over and over and over in this overview. So hopefully you're walking away with this clear message, which is, okay, we are required to do these components. You all did that analysis in week 2. And so now, this week, what I really want you to think about is starting to create that vision in your own minds is how am I going to leverage these existing measures and components of teacher evaluation, right? To facilitate those things that we know support teacher growth and continuous practice. So, your application for this week is threefold. So the first thing you're going to do is you're going to analyze those components. And I went into detail with that earlier. And so you have a link to that chart. If the chart doesn't work for you, no big deal. I do want you to read the provided article about value added and revisit the Nebraska guidance on student learning objectives. You can conduct your own research as well. But I want you to take a position not on value added, because again, we're not going to do value added evaluation in Nebraska. But I want you to take a position on whether or not student achievement and evaluation can have a relationship and what that can be. And then finally, you're going to make two more recommendations. And you could connect these two recommendations to your recommendations that you made in Module 2, or they can be separate. But I think it really makes sense. In Module 2, you identified two things that you're recommending to strengthen evaluation in your own district. So now in week 4, we can connect that to those existing systems that are already in place in your district to meet those ultimate recommendations. So I hope that you enjoy this module. And if you have any questions, reach out and I would be happy to talk through anything with you. Thank you.